The noxious smell, untraceable in the drains, inaccessible to the plumbers, that has its hour of the night. You do not know. The unspoken voice of sorrow in the ancient bedroom. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I am not speaking of my own experience, but trying to give you comparisons in a more familiar medium. I am the old house with the noxious smell and the sorrow before morning, in which all past is present, all degradation is unredeemable. As for what happens of the past, you can only see what is past, not what is always present. That is what matters, said Harry. Agatha says, Nevertheless, Harry, best tell us as you can. Talk in your own language without stopping to debate, whether it may be too far beyond our understanding. Harry said, The sudden solitude in a crowded desert, in a thick smoke, many creatures moving without direction, for no direction leads anywhere but round and round in that vapor, without purpose, without principle of conduct, in flickering intervals of light and darkness, the partial anesthesia of suffering without feeling, and partial observation of one's own automatism, while the slow stain sinks deeper through the skin, tainting the flesh and discoloring the bone. This is what matters, but it is unspeakable, untranslatable. I talk in general terms because the particular has no language. One thinks to escape by violence, but one is still alone in an overcrowded desert, jostled by ghosts. It was only reversing the senseless direction for a momentary rest on the burning wheel that cloudless night in the mid-Atlantic when I pushed her over. One's never alone, right? Things can be most crowded when one appears to be alone. Violet says. Pushed her? Harry says. You would never imagine anyone could sink so quickly. I'd always supposed, wherever I went, that she would be with me, whatever I did, that she was unkillable. It was not like that. Everything is true in a different sense. I expected to find her when I went back to the cabin. Later I became excited. I think I made inquiries. The pursuer and the steward were extremely sympathetic, and the doctor very attentive. That night I slept heavily, alone. Amy says. Harry! Charles says. You mustn't indulge in such dangerous fancies. It's only doing harm to your mother and yourself. Of course we know what really happened. We read it in the papers. No need to revert to it. Remember, my boy, I understand your life together made it seem more horrible. There's a lot in my own past life that presses on my chest. When I wake, as I do now, early before morning, I understand these feelings better than you know. But you have no reason to reproach yourself. Your conscience can be clear, Harry says. It goes a good deal deeper than what people call their conscience. It is just the cancer that eats away the self. I knew how you would take it. First of all, you isolate the single event as something so dreadful that it couldn't have happened, because you could not bear it. So you must believe that I suffer from delusions. It is not my conscience, not my mind that is deceased, but the world I have to live in. I lay 2 days in contented drowsiness. Then I recovered. I am afraid of sleep, a condition in which one can be caught for the last time. And also waking, she is nearer than ever. The contamination has reached the marrow, and they are always near. Here, nearer than ever. They are very close here. I had not expected that. Amy says, Harry, you are very tired and overwrought, coming so far, and making such haste. The change is too sudden for you. You are unused to our foggy climate, and the northern country, when you see Wishwood again by day, all will be the same again. I beg you to go now and rest before dinner. Get Downing to draw you a hot bath, and you will feel better. Agatha says, "There are certain points I do not yet understand. They will be clear later. I am also convinced that you only hold a fragment of explanation. It is only because of what you do not understand that you feel the need to declare what you do. There is more to understand. Hold fast to that as the way to freedom." Harry says, "I think I see what you mean dimly, as you once explained the sobbing in the chimney, the evil in the dark closet, which they said was not there, which they explained away, but you explained them, or at least made me cease to be afraid of them. I will go and have my bath." And you see why T.S. Eliot's included in my Celtic series is that there's a meaning everywhere, a spiritual underlying current in everything. Well, maybe not everything as we're shown here, but all over the place, right? And a vitality for life for itself. Gerald says, "God preserve us. I never thought it would be as bad as this." Violet says, "There's only one thing to be done. Harry must see a doctor." Ivy says, "But I understand. I have heard of such cases before, that people in his condition often betray the most immoderate resentment. At such a suggestion, they can be very cunning. Their malady makes them so. They do not want to be cured, and they know what you are thinking." Charles says, "He probably let this notion grow in his mind. Living amongst strangers, with no one to talk to, I suspect it is simply that the wish to get rid of her makes him believe he did. He cannot trust his good fortune. I believe that all he needs is someone to talk to get it off his mind. I'll have a talk to him tomorrow." Amy says, "Most certainly not, Charles. You're not the right person. I prefer to believe that a few days at Witchwood among his own family is all he needs," Gerald says. "Nevertheless, Amy, there's something in Violet's suggestion. Why not ring up Warburton and ask him to join us? He's an old friend of the family. It's perfectly natural that he should be asked. He looked after all the boys when they were children. I'll have a word with him. He can talk to Harry, and Harry need have no suspicion. I'd trust Warburton's opinion," Amy says. "If anyone speaks to Dr. Warburton, it should be myself. What does Agatha think?" Agatha says, "It seems a necessary move in an unnecessary action. Not for the good that it will do, but that nothing may be left undone. On the margin of the impossible," Amy says. "Very well, I will ring up the doctor myself," and exits. Charles says, "Meanwhile, I have an idea. Why not question Downing? He's been with Harry 10 years. He's absolutely discreet. He was with them on the boat. He might be of use." Ivy says, "Charles, you don't really suppose that he might have pushed her over?" Charles says, "In any case, I shouldn't blame Harry. I might have done the same thing once myself. Nobody knows what he's likely to do until there's somebody he wants to get rid of," Gerald says. "Even so, we don't want Downing to know any more than he knows already. And even if he knew, it's very much better that he shouldn't know that we knew it also. Why not let sleeping dogs lie?" Charles says. "All the same, there's a question or two." Yeah. Don't cover up for people if you think that, well, I don't know what I would have done in that situation. Yeah, you still need to deal with that. So the bell rings, and Charles continues, "I'd like to ask Downing. He shan't know why I'm asking." Denman enters. "Denman, where's Downing? Is he up with his lordship?" Denman says, "He's out in the garage." "Sir, with his lordship's car," Charles says. "Tell him I'd like to have a word with him, please." And Denman exits. Violet says, Charles, if you are determined upon this investigation, which I am convinced is going to lead us nowhere, and which I am sure Amy would disapprove of, I only wish to express my emphatic protest, both against your purpose and the means you are employing. Charles says, my purpose is to find out what's wrong with Harry. Until we know that, we can do nothing for him. And as for my means, we can't afford to be squeamish in taking hold of anything that comes to hand. If you are interested in helping Harry, you can hardly object to the means. Violet says, I do object. Ivy says, and I wish to associate myself with my sister in her objections. Agatha says, I have no objection, any more than I object to asking Dr. Warburton. I only see that this is all quite irrelevant. We had better leave Charles to talk to Downing and pursue his own methods. And rises. Violet says, I do not agree. I think that there should be witnesses. I intend to remain, and I wish to be present, to hear what Downing says. I want to know at once, not be told about it later, Ivy says. And I shall stay with Violet. Agatha says, I shall return when Downing has left you, and exits. Charles says, well, I am very sorry you see it all like this, but there simply are times when there's nothing to do but take the bull by the horns, and this is one. Downing knocks and enters. Charles says, good evening, Downing. It's good to see you again after all these years. You're well, I hope, Downing says. Thank you very well indeed, sir. Charles says, I'm sorry to send for you so abruptly, but I've a question I'd like to put to you. I'm sure you won't mind. It's about his lordship. You've looked after his lordship for over 10 years. Downing says, 11 years. Sir, next Lady Day. Charles says, 11 years, and you know him pretty well. And I'm sure that you've been a good friend to him, too. We haven't seen him for nearly 8 years, and to tell the truth, now that we've seen him, we're a little worried about his health. He doesn't seem to be quite himself. Downing says, quite natural, if I may say so, sir, after what happened. Charles says, quite so, quite, Downing. You were with him on the voyage from New York. We didn't learn very much about the circumstances. We only know what we read in the papers. Of course, there was a great deal, too much, in the papers. Downing, do you think it might have been suicide, and that his lordship knew it? Downing says, unlikely, sir, if I may say so. Much more likely to have been an accident. I mean, knowing her ladyship, I don't think she had the courage. Charles says, did she ever talk of suicide? Downing says, oh yes, she did, every now and again. But in my opinion, it is those that talk that are the least likely. To my way of thinking, she only did it to frighten people. If you take my meaning, just for the effect. Charles says, I understand, Downing. Was she in good spirits? Downing says, well, always about the same, sir. What I mean is always up and down. Down in the morning and up in the evening, and then she used to get rather excited and in a way irresponsible, sir. If I may make so bold, sir, I always thought that a very few cocktails went a long way with her ladyship. She wasn't one of those that are designed for drinking. It's natural for some and unnatural for others, Charles says. And how was his lordship during the voyage? Downing says, well, you might say depressed, sir, but you know his lordship was always very quiet, uncommon, that I saw him in high spirits. For what my judgment's worth, I always said his lordship suffered from me what they call a kind of repression. But what struck me more nervous than usual, I mean to say that you could see that he was nervous. He behaved as if he thought something might happen. Charles says, what sort of thing? Downing says, well, I don't know, sir, but he seemed very anxious about my lady. Tried to keep her in when the weather was rough. Didn't like to see her lean over the rail. He was in a rare fright once or twice. But you know, it's just my opinion, sir, that his lordship is rather psychic, as they say. Charles says, were they always together? Downing says, always, sir. That was my just complaint against my lady. It is my opinion that man and wife shouldn't see too much of each other, sir. Quite the contrary of the usual opinion. I dare say I wouldn't leave him alone. And there's my complaint against these ocean liners. with all their swimming baths and gymnasiums. There's not even a place where a man can go for a quiet smoke, where the women can't follow him. She wouldn't leave him out of her sight, Charles says. During that evening, did you see him? Downing says, "Oh, yes, sir, I'm sure I saw him. I don't mean to say that he had any orders. His lordship is always most considerate about keeping me up, but when I say I saw him, you mean that I saw him accidental. You see, sir, I was down in the turret, and I took a bit of air before I went to bed, and you could see the corner of the upper deck, and I remember there I saw his lordship leaning over the rail, looking at the water. There wasn't a moon, but I was sure it was him. While I took my turn about for near half an hour, he stayed there alone, looking over the rail. Her ladyship must have been all right then, wasn't she, sir? Or else he'd have known it." Charles says, "Oh, yes, quite so. Thank you, Downing. I don't think we need you any more." Gerald says to Charles, well, I guess to Downing. "Oh, Downing, is there anything wrong with his lordship's car?" Downing says, "Oh, no, sir. She's in good running order. I see to that." Gerald says, "I only wondered why you've been busy about it tonight." Downing says, "Nothing wrong, sir. Only I like to have her always ready. Would there be anything more, sir?" Gerald says, "Thank you, Downing. Nothing more." And Downing exits. "Well, Charles, I must say, with your investigations, you seem to have left matters much as they were, except for having brought Downing into it, of which I disapprove," Charles says. "Of which you disapprove? But I believe that an unconscious accomplice is desirable." Then the chorus. "Why should we stand here like guilty conspirers, waiting for some revelation? When the hidden shall be exposed, and the newsboys shall shout in the street. When the private shall be made public, and the common photographer flashlight for the picture papers. Why do we huddle together in a horrid amity of misfortune? Why should we be implicated, brought in, and brought together?" Ivy says, "I do not trust Charles with his confident vulgarity, acquired from worldly associates," Gerald says. "Ivy is only concerned for herself and her credit among her shabby, genteel acquaintance." Violet says, "Gerald is certain to make some blunder. He is useless out of the army." Charles says, "Violet is afraid that her status as Amy's sister will be diminished." And then the chorus. "We all of us make the pretension to be uncommon exception to the universal bondage. We like to appear in the newspapers so long as we are in the right column. We know about the railway accident. We know about the sudden thrombosis and the slowly hardening artery. We like to be thought well of by others so that we may think well of ourselves, and any explanation will satisfy. We only ask to be reassured about the noises in the cellar and the window that should not have been open. Why do we all behave as if the door might suddenly open, the curtains be drawn, the cellar make some dreadful disclosure, the roof disappear, and we should cease to be sure of what is real or unreal? Hold tight, hold tight. We must insist that the world is what we have always taken it to be." In Amy's voice, "Ivy, Violet, has Arthur or John come yet?" Ivy says, "There's no news of Arthur or John." Amy and Agatha enter. Amy says, "It is very annoying. They both promised to be here in good time for dinner. It is very annoying now they can hardly arrive in time to dress. I do not understand what could have gone wrong with both of them coming from different directions. Well, we must go and dress, I suppose. I hope Harry will feel better after his rest upstairs." Exeunt, except Agatha. And scene 2 starts with Mary and turning upon Agatha with flowers, saying, "The spring is very late in this northern country, late and uncertain, clings to the south wall. The gardener had no garden flowers to give me for this evening," Agatha says. "I always forget how late the spring is here," Mary says. "I had rather wait for our wind-blown blossoms, such as they are, than have these greenhouse flowers, which do not belong here, which do not know the wind and rain as I know them," Agatha says. "I wonder how many we shall be for dinner," Mary says. 7, 9, 10, surely. "I hear that Harry has arrived already, and that he was the only one that was uncertain. Arthur or John may be late, of course. We may have to keep the dinner back," Agatha says. "And also Dr. Warburton, or at least Amy has invited him," Mary says. "Dr. Warburton? I think she might have told me. It is very difficult having to plan for uncertain numbers. Why did she ask him?" Agatha says. "She only thought of asking him a little while ago," Mary says. "Well, there's something to be said for having an outsider, for what is more formal than a family dinner, an official occasion of uncomfortable people, who meet very seldom, making conversation. I am very glad if Dr. Warburton is coming. I shall have to sit between Arthur and John, which is worse, thinking of what to say to John, or having to listen to Arthur's chatter, when he thinks he's behaving like a man of the world. Cousin Agatha, I want your advice," Agatha says. "I should have thought you had more than you wanted of that when at college," Mary says. "I might have known you'd throw that up against me. I know I wasn't one of your favorite students. I only saw you as a hard headmistress who knew the way of dominating timid girls. I don't see you any different now, but I really wish that I'd taken your advice and tried for a fellowship 7 years ago. Now I want your advice because there's no one else to ask, and because you are strong, and because you don't belong here any more than I do. I want to get away," Agatha says. "After 7 years?" Mary says. "Oh, you don't understand, but you do understand. You only want to know whether I understand. You know perfectly well what Cousin Amy wants, she usually gets. And why do you so seldom come here? You're not afraid of her, but I think you must have wanted to avoid collision. I suppose I could have gone if I had the moral courage. Even against a will like hers, I know very well why she wanted to keep me. She didn't need me. She would have done just as well with a hired servant, or with none. She only wanted me for Harry. No, not such a compliment. She only wanted to have a tame daughter-in-law with very little money, a housekeeper companion for her and Harry. Even when he married, she still held on to me because she couldn't bear to let any project go, and even when she died, I believe that Cousin Amy, I almost believed it, had killed her by willing. Doesn't that sound awful? I know that. It does. Did you ever meet her? What was she like? Agatha says, I'm the only one who ever met her. The only one Harry asked to his wedding. Amy did not know that. I was sorry for her. I could see that she distrusted me. She was frightened of the family. She wanted to fight them with the weapons of the weak, which are too violent. And it could not have been easy living with Harry. It's not what she did to Harry is important, I think, but what he did to himself. Mary says to Agatha. But it wasn't till I knew that Harry had returned that I felt the strength to go. I know I must go, but where? I want a job, and you can help me. Agatha says, I'm very sorry, Mary. I am very sorry for you. Though you may not think me capable of such a feeling, I would like to help you, but you must not run away. Any time before now it would have shown courage, and would have been right. Now the courage is only the moment, and the moment is only fear and pride. I see more than this, more than I can tell you, more than there are words for. At this moment, there is no decision to be made. The decision will be made by powers beyond us, which now and then emerge. You and I, Mary, are only watchers and waiters. Not the easiest role. I must go and change for dinner. Mary says, So you will not help me? Waiting, waiting, always waiting. I think this house means to keep us waiting. Harry enters and says, "Waiting for what?" Mary says, "How do you do, Harry? You were down very early. I thought you had just arrived." "Did you have a comfortable journey?" Harry says, "Not very, but at least it did not last long. How are you, Mary?" Mary says, "Oh, very well. What are you looking for?" Harry says, "I had only just noticed that this room is quite unchanged. The same hangings, the same pictures, even the table. The chairs, the sofa, all in the same positions. I was looking to see if anything was changed, but if so, I cannot find it." Mary says, "Your mother insisted on everything being kept the same as when you left it." Harry says, "I wish she had not done that. It's very unnatural, this arresting of the normal change of things, but it's very like her, what I might have expected. It only makes the changing of people all the more manifest." Mary says, "Yes, nothing changes here." And we just go on, drying up, I suppose, not noticing the change. But to you, I am sure, you must seem very altered. Harry says, "You've hardly changed at all, and I haven't seen you since. You came down from Oxford." Mary says, "Well, I must go and change for dinner. We do change to that extent." Harry says, "No, don't go just yet." Mary says, "Are you glad to be at home?" Harry says, "There was something I wanted to ask you. I don't know yet. All these years I'd been longing to get back, because I thought I never should. I thought it was a place where life was substantial and simplified, but the simplification took place in my memory. I think it seems I shall get rid of nothing, of none of the shadows that I wanted to escape, and at the same time other memories, earlier forgotten, began to return out of my childhood. I can't explain, but I thought I might escape from one life to another, and it may be all one life with no escape. Tell me, were you ever happy there as a child at Witchwood?" Mary says, "Happy? Not really, though I never knew why. It always seemed that it must be my own fault, and never to be happy was always to be naughty. But there were reasons. I was only a cousin, kept here because there was nothing else to do with me. I didn't belong here. It was different for you, and you seemed so much older. We were rather in awe of you, at least I was." Harry says to Mary, "Why were we not happy?" Mary says, "Well, it all seemed to be imposed upon us. Even the nice things were laid out ready, and the treats were always so carefully prepared. There was never any time to invent our own enjoyment. But perhaps it was all designed for you, not for us." Harry says, "No, it didn't seem like that. It was part of the design as well as you. But what was the design? It never came off. But do you remember?" Mary says, "The hollow tree and what we call the wilderness." Harry says, "Down near the river. That was the stockade from which we fought the Indians, Arthur and John." Mary says, "It was the cave where we met by moonlight to raise the evil spirits." Harry says, "Arthur and John, of course, we were punished for being out at night after being put to bed, but at least they never knew where we had been." Mary says, "They never found the secret." Harry says, "Not then, but later, coming back from school for the holidays. After the formal reception and the family festivities, I made my escape as soon as I could and slipped down to the river to find the old hiding place. The wilderness was gone. The tree had been felled, and a neat summer house had been erected to please the children. It's absurd that one's only memory of freedom should be a hollow tree in a wood by a river." Mary says, "But when I was a child, I took everything for granted, including the stupidity of older people. They lived in another world which did not touch me. Just now, I find them very difficult to bear. They are always assured that you ought to be happy, at the very moment when you are wholly conscious of being a misfit, of being superfluous. But why should I talk about my commonplace troubles? They must seem very trivial indeed to you. It's just ordinary hopelessness." Harry says, "One thing you could not know. the sudden extinction of every alternative, the unexpected crash of the iron cataract. You don't know what hope is until you have lost it. You only know what it is not to hope. You do not know what it is to have hope taken from you, or to fling it away, or to join the legion of the hopeless, unrecognized by other men, though sometimes by each other. Mary says, I know what you mean. That is an experience I have not had. Nevertheless, however real, however cruel, it may be a deception. Harry says, may be one dream or another, if there is nothing else. What I see, the most real, is what I fear. The bright color fades, together with the unrecapturable emotion, the glow upon the world that never found its object, and the eye adjusts to itself, to a twilight, where the dead stone is seen to be batrachian, the aphilos branch, ophidian. Mary says, you bring your own landscape, no more real than the other, and in a way you contradict yourself. That sudden comprehension of death, of the death of hope, of which you speak, I know you have experienced it, and I can well imagine how awful it must be. But in this world, another hope keeps springing in an unexpected place, while we are unconscious of it. You hope for something in coming back to Witchwood, or you would not have come, Harry says. Whatever I hope for, now that I am here, I know I shall not find it. The instinct to return to the point of departure and start again as if nothing had happened. Isn't that all folly? It's like the hollow tree, not there, Mary says, but surely what you say only proves that you expected Witchwood to be your real self, to do something for you, that you can only do for yourself. What you need to alter is something inside you, which you can change anywhere, here as well as elsewhere, Harry says. Something inside me? You think that can be altered. And here indeed, where I have felt them near me. Here and here and here, wherever I am not looking, always flickering the corner of my eye, almost whispering just out of earshot, and inside too, in the nightly panic of dreaming dissolution. You do not know. You cannot know. You cannot understand, Mary says. I think I could understand, but you would have to be patient with me and with people who have not had your experience. Harry says, if I tried to explain, you could never understand. Explaining would only make a worse misunderstanding. Explaining would only set me farther from you. There is only one way for you to understand, and that's by seeing. They are much too clever to admit you into our world. Yours is no better. They